Have you ever felt invisible in a place you fought your whole life to belong? Celeste Morgan stepped into the first-class cabin of Stratus Air Flight 917 with the calm confidence of a woman who had conquered every room she had ever entered. Her steps were measured, her head held high, but beneath the surface, a quiet vigilance flickered like a low-burning flame. The leather seats gleamed under the soft gold lights. The scent of expensive champagne drifted through the air, mingling with hushed laughter and the faint clinking of crystal glasses. Celeste moved to seat 1A, the seat reserved for those deemed worthy enough to look down at the world from above the clouds. She placed her black leather bag in the overhead compartment, her fingers steady, each movement as graceful as a symphony's final note. As she settled into her seat, she felt the weight of unspoken expectations around her. Eyes glanced her way, then quickly darted back. Names were called behind her with warm familiarity, each Mr., wrapped in respect. But no one called her name. Celeste opened her tablet, reviewing the final slides for the Geneva presentation that could redefine the future of data security worldwide. Every chart, every prediction was flawless. Just like her life had to be, a flight attendant approached, blonde hair neatly tied, a practiced smile that failed to reach her cold eyes. "Good afternoon, ma'am." Her tone sliced through the air, sharp enough to leave a mark. Celeste looked up, her gaze calm but unwavering. She nodded politely, yet inside, she was already scanning, already measuring the subtle cracks in this perfect world. She had pre-ordered her meal a week ago, lobster bisque, prime steak, a vintage Bordeaux. A ritual she honored on every international flight, not to indulge, but to assert her presence in a space that often refused to see her. But today, something felt different. A shift in the air, an echo of every boardroom smirk, every polite but loaded question she had ever received. Celeste didn't know it yet, but this flight wasn't just a journey to Geneva. It was a quiet battlefield, and she was about to start a war without raising her voice. Because sometimes, the most powerful storms begin with a single, silent seat. The hum of the terminal seemed to fade the moment Celeste Morgan stepped onto the jet bridge. Every sound turned into a distant echo behind her polished footsteps. She walked as if the world had slowed down to watch. Each step was deliberate, like the final strokes on a masterpiece that only she understood. She carried nothing excessive, just a sleek black handbag, her tablet, and the weight of every boardroom door she had ever pushed open. The doors that never fully opened for her, yet she forced her way through anyway. The first-class cabin shimmered under warm, honey-toned lighting. The scent of caviar and aged whiskey floated softly in the air, wrapping around the hush of whispered deals and self-satisfied laughs. Celeste paused by seat 1A, her reserved sanctuary among the clouds. As she lifted her bag into the overhead compartment, she felt the unspoken glances. The ones that didn't say her name, the ones that slid past her like she was an unexpected stain on an ivory carpet. A soft chime rang through the cabin. A flight attendant leaned forward to greet a white male passenger behind her. "Welcome back, Mr. Radcliffe. We've prepared your preferred champagne." Celeste turned slightly, her lips curving into a polite, controlled smile. Inside, she heard the echo of 1,000 quiet battles. She lowered herself into the seat, her posture elegant, her spine straight as a blade. Her fingers moved across her tablet, checking the final contract details for Geneva. Numbers, strategy, risk charts. Every number sharp, every graph a shield. Outside the window, the tarmac blurred under moving ground crews and blinking runway lights. But Celeste didn't watch them. She had already learned that the true storms were never out there. They always brewed inside. A male attendant stopped near her row, bowing deeply. "Mr. Malcolm, so good to have you with us again. We've set aside your caviar and your favorite single malt." No one addressed her by name, no warm recognition, just the soft shuffle of cloth napkins and silver cutlery behind her. Celeste's heart beat evenly, slow and patient. She felt it in her fingertips, that low hum of readiness she had carried since her first investor pitch at 26. The day they asked her if she was there to take notes or fetch coffee. She remembered the sound of her own voice, steady and steel-edged. She remembered the look in their eyes when she showed them numbers they couldn't deny. That same resolve now filled her chest like a quiet drum, a silent rhythm only she could hear. A voice sliced through the moment. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'll be taking care of you today." Celeste looked up. A blonde woman stood above her, hair tight at the nape, her smile thin, practiced. Celeste returned the look, her expression calm but firm, as if reading an old, familiar script. She nodded once, slowly. Her silence was not permission. It was calculation. Seat 1A wrapped around her like a velvet fortress. But beneath its softness, Celeste felt the hard steel of her own existence. She reached for the small silver button on her armrest, adjusted her seat just slightly. Then she breathed in the same air as everyone else. But in her lungs, it turned into something different. A quiet fire waiting. Outside, engines roared to life and the plane began to inch forward. A smooth glide, like a shark beneath dark water. Celeste closed her eyes for a moment, her fingers resting on her tablet, tracing silent lines across the glass. Today was not just another flight. It was the prelude to a symphony only she knew how to conduct. The cabin lights softened into a golden glow as the plane began its steady climb above New York City. Celeste kept her eyes closed, but every vibration in the seat, every shift in the air around her, registered in her mind like quiet signals. A soft chime, a rustle of napkins, a low laugh 2 rows back. She heard it all. She opened her eyes and looked around slowly. The male attendants moved through the aisle, their voices smooth as silk when they addressed the white businessmen nearby. "Sir, your champagne is ready." "Mr. Clayton, would you like your usual amuse-bouche now?" She waited, watched. No one came to her row. No one called her name. She touched the edge of her armrest, feeling the leather seam beneath her fingertips. Her heartbeat stayed steady, but her mind began to sharpen. She remembered that boardroom in Palo Alto when she was 26, standing alone in front of 7 men in crisp shirts. The moment one of them asked if she was the marketing intern there to take pictures. She didn't flinch then. She wouldn't now. A soft breeze from the air vent brushed against her cheek, cold and impersonal. Celeste adjusted it slightly, her fingers steady as she kept listening to the fragmented sounds of laughter and the clink of glassware drifting from behind her. She glanced at her tablet screen, the Geneva contract gleaming back in perfect lines and graphs, the future of data security, a future she had designed to be impenetrable. Yet here, her presence felt as fragile as paper in a storm. A tray cart squeaked in the aisle. She saw Becky moving forward, her steps confident, eyes scanning the passengers like a careful curator of an art gallery. Celeste noted every detail. The way Becky leaned closer to Mr. Radcliffe, her voice lower and more intimate, the soft way she called him by name. Becky's eyes brushed over Celeste for a split second. They didn't pause, didn't soften. Instead, they skipped her as if she were a ghost in a room full of kings. Celeste shifted in her seat, crossing one leg over the other with meticulous grace. Her hand hovered above the call button but didn't press it. Not yet. She remembered London at 34. A journalist asked if she believed her Forbes recognition was due to diversity policies rather than her own merit. The sting of that question had long since turned into a scar she carried like armor. Outside the window, moonlight reflected off the Atlantic, turning the waves below into silver threads. It looked peaceful from above, but she knew the ocean could drown whole empires without a sound. The scent of warm bread and butter drifted past her. A fleeting comfort meant for others. She inhaled slowly, letting the disappointment settle deep inside, transforming it into something precise and powerful. A sudden hush settled in the cabin as the appetizer service began. Platters of caviar moved like trophies from row to row. Another quiet moment of recognition for those who had always been seen. Celeste adjusted the collar of her tailored navy blazer. Every thread had been chosen, every detail a silent declaration of her belonging. Yet now each stitch felt like a question. A faint chuckle rose from behind her. Someone joked about crypto and venture capital, a careless conversation that could erase whole industries overnight. But none of them knew what it took to survive in the shadows of rooms that had no doors for people like her. She felt a tightening in her chest, not from fear, but from an old, relentless ache that had followed her through every summit and every signed contract. Her fingers tapped gently on the armrest. 1 beat, 2, 3, like a quiet drum calling forth the storm she had kept hidden for too long. Becky moved closer, her tray heavy with gleaming glassware and silver spoons. She glanced over Celeste again, her gaze as fleeting and cold as the air outside. Celeste's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but into a shape sharp enough to cut through the golden hush of first class. She knew the moment was coming. The moment when the system would show its true face, and she would not turn away. Above the ocean, the plane sailed quietly on, but inside Seat 1A, a different kind of current began to surge. The hush of first class broke as Becky finally stopped at Seat 1A. She held a tray, not silver and shining, but cheap plastic lined with a wilted sandwich and a single glass of water that trembled slightly under her grip. Celeste looked at it, her gaze still and unwavering. A cold silence stretched between them, heavy as an ocean trench. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We've run out of your pre-ordered meal." Becky's voice carried no warmth, no apology beyond the forced words. Celeste didn't flinch. Her fingers paused mid-tap on the armrest. She tilted her head slowly, studying Becky as if she were a line of code to be debugged. "I ordered my meal 7 days ago. Lobster bisque, prime steak, vintage Bordeaux." The words came out smooth, each syllable a scalpel slicing through the air. Becky shrugged, a quick upward twitch of her shoulders, as if dismissing a harmless inconvenience. Maybe the system didn't update. It happens all the time. Celeste's eyes narrowed. She saw it now, the invisible architecture behind the service smiles. The fragile walls that held up a system of exclusion so well practiced it had become almost elegant. Becky turned without waiting for a response, drifting away to tend to another row. Laughter rose from behind, glasses clinked again, and a small ripple of conversation resumed as if nothing had happened. Celeste lowered her gaze to the sandwich. 2 thin slices of bread, a smear of something unrecognizable, a single limp lettuce leaf that looked more like a half-forgotten note than food. She didn't touch it. She let it sit, a quiet monument to every meeting where her ideas were repeated back to her as if they belonged to someone else. Every boardroom where she was told she was lucky to be there at all. She looked up, scanning the cabin. "Mr." Radcliffe leaned back in his seat, laughing with his mouth open, the glint of champagne on his tongue. Mr. Malcolm tapped on his watch, nodding as Becky offered him a second glass of whiskey, poured slow and reverent. A wave of warmth pooled low in her chest, but it wasn't anger. It was something older, deeper, forged from every moment she chose not to break. She remembered being 33, standing in the sterling Capitol boardroom, mistaken for an assistant. The man asking for coffee. Her answer had been a gentle blade. "I'll bring it if you let me pitch my $15 million security plan right after." Silence then. And victory after. Now in Seat 1A, silence returned. But this time it was different. It was no longer a shield. It was a weapon. Her fingers moved toward her smartwatch, the screen lighting up softly like an eye opening in the dark. She began to type, each letter measured, each word exact. Outside, the Atlantic stretched endlessly, dark waves dancing beneath a silver moon. But inside Celeste's mind, a different tide began to rise, unstoppable, patient, ancient as the sea itself. She didn't look at the sandwich again. She didn't need to. It had already spoken everything she needed to hear, and she was ready to answer. Celeste's fingers glided across the smartwatch screen, her movements as calm as a pianist before the first note. The soft glow reflected in her eyes, turning them into shards of midnight glass. She typed with deliberate grace. "Activate internal audit. Flight 917. Cabin crew ID SDA9035 confirm within 10 minutes. A gentle vibration pulsed against her wrist, a quiet signal from a world far below. In her Manhattan office, Aaliyah Grant sat in a dark room lit only by the blue light of her monitors. Her hair tied tightly, her glasses catching the screen's glow like a watchtower in a storm. Aaliyah didn't need an explanation. She had known Celeste long enough to understand the language of silence. She pulled up the cross-referencing database, her fingers tapping out a rhythm of war drums. On the plane, Celeste lowered her wrist, resting her hands softly on her lap. Around her, the cabin thrummed with artificial warmth, clinking glasses, low laughter, the quiet shuffle of fine leather shoes. No one noticed her. No one saw the storm breaking beneath her calm. Aaliyah's screen flashed with a file. Rebecca Ann Whitmore joined 2018 senior cabin crew, repeated minor service complaints, favoritism noted. No formal action taken. Aaliyah's lips twitched, not a smile, but the hint of a blade hidden in a velvet sheath. She began assembling the report, line by line, each complaint a stitch in a shroud now tightening around Becky's world. Celeste glanced out the window at the endless Atlantic night. Her reflection met her gaze, steady and sharp. The sandwich still sat untouched, like a relic of another life she had already outgrown. A new notification glowed on her watch. Initial data confirmed. Pattern of biased behavior consistent, proceeding with full analysis. Celeste's fingers tapped once on the armrest, the echo loud only to her. She looked toward the galley, where Becky stood, her laugh soft and sweet as honey dripping from a poisoned spoon. Celeste didn't blink. She saw every angle, every crack, every fracture in the careful mask of service. Aaliyah's fingers flew faster, opening archived flight records, sifting through digital dust for every forgotten whisper of complaint, every silenced ripple. On board, Daniel passed by with fresh towels, his eyes carefully avoiding Celeste's. His silence folded into the walls like an obedient ghost. Celeste breathed in, her chest expanding with a quiet, fiery certainty. Each inhale was a gathering of storms, each exhale a promise of the world that would follow. Another ping. Full behavioral pattern retrieved, evidence file attached. Celeste's gaze drifted forward, toward the cockpit light shining faintly at the end of the aisle. Her lips barely parted, a breath, a thought, a silent sentence echoing in her mind. This was no longer about food, no longer about politeness or service gone wrong. It was about erasure, and she would not let them erase her. Outside, the stars scattered across the ocean sky like cold sparks. But in seat 1A, a new constellation began to burn, bright enough to blind anyone who dared look away. Daniel approached quietly, the tray in his hand trembling almost imperceptibly. Celeste's eyes locked on him before he spoke, her gaze as sharp as the edge of a silent blade. "I have a question," she said, her voice soft but firm enough to crack porcelain. Daniel paused, his lips parting but no words emerging. What criteria determine meal priority when there's a shortage? Her words fell into the space between them like stones into still water. Daniel shifted, his fingers tightening around the tray. "Usually, it depends on order timing and loyalty tier." He didn't meet her eyes. "I'm a Diamond Plus member. I ordered 7 days ago." She leaned forward just slightly, enough to tilt the entire universe toward her. Daniel swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. Perhaps there was a system error or a crew decision based on other factors. Celeste tilted her head, her expression unreadable, like moonlight on deep water. Other factors. He opened his mouth to explain further, but she raised one hand, a silent command. "No need. I understand now." She turned her face away, her eyes drifting back to the dark window where the stars pulsed like ancient signals. Her heart beat slowly, every pulse echoing with decisions she had made in boardrooms, in crowded investor lounges, in quiet hotel corridors at dawn. Aaliyah's final report slid into her watch display, full pattern established, internal evidence validated, legal readiness confirmed. Celeste tapped once. A single sound, quiet and absolute like a verdict. Her mind replayed Becky's shrug, the cold dismissal echoing like footsteps in an abandoned hall. She remembered every time she had been told to be grateful for what she was given, to sit quietly and not ask for more. In that moment, her silence was no longer compliance. It was a declaration of war. Daniel backed away, his eyes lowered, retreating like a shadow at sunrise. Behind her, laughter rolled like a distant thunderstorm, the clink of ice in a glass, the murmured brag about $1 billion fund. Celeste's fingers hovered over her tablet, the screen glowing with the power of her own making. Numbers, contracts, digital blueprints of empires she had built with bare hands and a mind no one could dismiss. Outside, the Atlantic roared beneath the plane, wild and endless. Inside, Celeste was calmer than she had ever been. She pressed send. A single gesture, but enough to break the bones of an entire system. A quiet exhale escaped her lips, almost a whisper of relief, almost a final goodbye to the old rules she had lived under for too long. She straightened her blazer, her eyes unwavering as they fixed on the aisle ahead. The lights flickered once above her, a subtle ripple through the luxury cabin. No one noticed. No one looked up. But in that ripple, the first crack appeared, and she would be there to watch it spread. The cabin settled into a quiet hum, like a stage after the orchestra has taken its final bow. Celeste leaned back in seat 1A, her breathing deep and steady. Around her, the curated luxury carried on as if nothing had shifted beneath its polished surface. Becky glided down the aisle, her movements fluid, her laughter carefully measured for each white male passenger. Her eyes sparkled under the cabin lights, unaware that every gesture was being captured, every careless glance recorded like lines in an unflinching poem. Aaliyah's update pinged on Celeste's watch. Ground team on standby. Geneva office prepped. HR and legal en route to arrival gate. Celeste closed her eyes briefly, a soft veil falling over a mind sharper than any courtroom blade. Behind her, the cabin's conversations wove together in a symphony of privilege. Radcliffe bragged about his hedge fund's next acquisition. Malcolm discussed exclusive resort expansions in Bali. Each word dripped with the entitlement of men who had never been asked to prove they belonged. Celeste's fingers hovered over the rim of her water glass, tracing slow, silent circles. A ritual, a preparation for the inevitable collision waiting below. Daniel passed her row again, this time his steps quick, his face taut with an invisible question he dared not ask. He paused, just for a heartbeat, before retreating into the galley, the door closing behind him like a confession. Outside, the Atlantic stretched beneath them, black and endless, a reminder of how easy it was to disappear into the dark. Celeste reopened her tablet. The Geneva Agreement glowed back at her, each clause a testament to her refusal to be reduced, to be ignored. She flipped to the final slide, her name in bold above the words Global Equity Initiative. A soft vibration interrupted her thoughts. Aaliyah again, evidence package uploaded, confirmation from straightest CEO's office. Next step, official legal hold. Celeste lifted her gaze slowly, watching Becky pour another glass of champagne, her hands graceful, her smile a practiced melody. A new ping. Ground team at Geneva has initiated protocol red line 917. Crew will be met immediately upon landing. Celeste felt no rush of victory, no surge of triumph, only a deep, resounding quiet that pulsed through her like a distant drum in a darkened hall. She thought of all the women who had sat in quiet compliance, who had swallowed small insults like bitter pills, who had been told over and over that patience was a virtue when silence was just a leash. A faint reflection in the window caught her eye, her own face, calm, precise, timeless, a constellation that refused to fade. She reached for her seatbelt, fastening it with a slow, deliberate click. The plane began to tilt downward, the first tremor of descent rumbling softly through the cabin. A final message appeared. Geneva legal ready, HR team on final standby, welcome team positioned. Celeste's lips curved into something almost like a smile, but sharper, quieter, an echo of every no she had ever been forced to swallow. As the nose of the aircraft lowered and the lights of Europe began to glimmer on the horizon, she closed her eyes once more. Her silence had ended, and the system would finally hear her. The plane began its final descent, a gentle tremor rolling through the floor beneath Celeste's feet. The cabin lights shifted to a soft blue, wrapping each passenger in a false calm, a final lullaby before landing. Celeste sat still, her hands folded lightly over her tablet. Each finger rested as if in prayer, but her mind moved like a steel river under moonlight. Behind her, laughter burst again, sharp and careless, echoing against the hush that had grown around seat 1A like an invisible fortress. Becky passed one last time, her eyes skipping Celeste, already counting tips and stories she'd spin later in the hotel bar. A chime rang. Passengers began to gather their belongings, shifting and murmuring about meetings and private cars waiting below. Celeste did not move. Aaliyah's final message blinked on her watch. Geneva team in position. HR and legal at the gate. Status. Irreversible. The plane tilted forward, wheels kissing the runway with a distant screech. The vibration rolled up Celeste's spine, the final shiver of a sleeping giant now fully awake. She unbuckled her seatbelt with a soft click, stood, and adjusted the crease of her navy blazer. Her motions slow, measured, as if each one carried a hidden line of code. She reached for her black leather bag, slipping it over her shoulder, her eyes forward, a lighthouse gaze cutting through the fog of pretense and false civility. Passengers pushed forward behind her, eager to exit, to vanish into Geneva's marble halls and glass conference towers. Celeste stayed in place, her presence a quiet wall no one dared to breach. 2 rows back, Becky finally looked up. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Becky hesitated. A flicker of something passed across her face, a fragile fracture in a mask she had worn too long. Celeste did not blink. She held that gaze, her expression smooth as a sealed envelope hiding a revolution inside. A low hum rose from the engines as the plane taxied toward the gate. The cabin lights turned bright again. The illusion of comfort returned for the final act. Daniel appeared at the galley door, his steps cautious, his face pale under the harsh overhead glow. His eyes darted from Celeste to Becky and back again, as if trying to trace the shape of an answer he no longer believed existed. The door hissed open. Celeste stepped forward, her shoes tapping softly on the floor, each step an echo of all the boardrooms, all the interviews, all the dinners where she had been made to wait, to explain, to justify her place. Outside, 2 figures in dark suits waited. Their heads bowed slightly, eyes trained on the floor, shoulders heavy under the weight of an incoming reckoning. Celeste paused at the threshold, her face turned slightly toward Becky, her lips parted, and in that thin, electric moment, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. No need to apologize. This is just the beginning. She stepped past the crew, past the silent apologies that would never be enough, into the corridor of light that waited beyond the aircraft door. A new frontier stretched out before her. The world didn't know it yet, but it had already begun to change. The hallway outside the plane glowed under harsh white lights, every surface polished to reflect a version of perfection that no longer existed. Celeste walked forward without hesitation, her steps echoing like soft thunder across the marble floors. 2 executives waited, their faces drawn, eyes wide with the understanding of a system laid bare. One man in a charcoal suit raised his hand as if to speak, but Celeste didn't slow, didn't acknowledge the trembling apology forming on his lips. She passed them, her presence a silent verdict that needed no jury. Behind her, the cabin door remained open. Becky stepped out slowly, her posture stiff, her smile now a brittle mask cracking under the weight of consequences she had never imagined would arrive. A small group in dark suits approached her, holding tablets and legal folders. One woman stepped forward, her eyes sharp as broken glass. "MS. Whitmore, please follow us to the private interview area." Becky's lips parted in protest, but no words formed. Her eyes darted around the corridor, searching for an ally who would not appear. Daniel followed behind, his head bowed, every step heavy with the realization that silence was never truly neutral. Further down, a line of crew stood in stunned quiet, their expressions frozen as the gentle luxury they had curated so carefully began to collapse inward like a hollow shell. Celeste continued forward, her gaze fixed on the glass exit doors ahead. Outside, Geneva glimmered in the distance, a city alive with secrets and power games she had long since learned to master. A black sedan waited at the curb, its door already open. Celeste stepped inside, her bag resting lightly on her lap. The moment the door closed, the world outside seemed to vanish into a muffled hum. She leaned back against the seat, her eyes half closed, the faint lights of the city streaking across her face like silent applause. Her watch vibrated once. A message from Aaliyah. Initial interviews have begun. Whitmore suspended indefinitely. Full review launched. Celeste exhaled, not in relief, but as a quiet release of a truth she had carried for decades. The truth that silence is not the absence of words, but the presence of unshakable force waiting for the right moment to rise. The sedan pulled into the main road, slipping into Geneva's midnight glow. Towers of glass flickered above, each window a story, each light a witness. In the plane behind her, Becky was led into a stark white room, cameras tracking every motion, every glance, every trembling breath. Her words now irrelevant against the mountain of data she had built with every shrug, every dismissive smile. A ripple of calls spread from the airport to Stratus headquarters, each executive voice rising in urgency as the realization spread. The system had failed, and the reckoning had arrived wrapped not in noise, but in quiet, precise devastation. Celeste opened her phone, her fingers moving over the screen like a final signature on a centuries-old letter. A single message. Remember, we do not need to shout to change the world. We only need to be undeniable. She placed the phone down, her reflection glimmering faintly in the tinted window beside her. The city lights rushed past, but inside the car, it was silent, timeless, endless as the sea, morning unfolded over Geneva like a slow, golden wave. Celeste sat by the window in her suite, watching the lake reflect the rising sun in fragments of light that looked like new beginnings. A steaming cup of herbal tea rested beside her hand, untouched. Her phone buzzed softly on the table. Headlines flooded in, each one carrying echoes of a system forced into confession. Global service giant faces reckoning after silent protest. Seat 1A movement sparks international outrage. From boardrooms to boarding gates, the quiet revolution begins. Celeste scrolled slowly, her eyes sharp, but her face still, like a sculpture carved from patience. Each article read not as praise but as proof. Proof that silence, when wielded right, could turn into the sharpest blade. Across the world, people shared their stories under the tag Seat 1A. Stories of being overlooked, of quiet humiliations hidden under polite smiles, of moments when they swallowed pain to keep moving forward. I was told to wait while they served everyone else first. They called every man by name, but called me Miss without a glance. I knew I didn't belong, but I stayed quiet. Celeste read each one, her fingers moving as if tracing the lines of an old wound she had carried for years. A soft chime rang at the door. A young woman stood there, her hands trembling slightly as she handed Celeste a letter. Celeste opened it carefully. The handwriting was messy, earnest, each word pressing into the paper with the force of a heart beating too fast. I saw your story. I thought I was alone when they called me just the helper at my tech internship. I thought maybe I wasn't good enough. Thank you for showing me I was never the problem. Celeste closed her eyes, her breath catching for just a moment. On her phone, a final headline appeared. Stratus Air CEO announces comprehensive cultural reform. Celeste Morgan to lead global advisory program. The words blurred, not from weakness, but from a relief so deep it felt like stepping onto solid ground after years of drifting at sea. She set the letter down, rose, and crossed to the window. The lake below glittered like a field of stars waiting to be claimed. Behind her, her phone buzzed again. Messages from investors, activists, journalists, allies. They wanted interviews, statements, public appearances. Celeste turned away from the window, her expression calm, certain. She didn't need to explain. The world had already heard her. She picked up her pen and a blank sheet of paper. Slowly, deliberately, she began to write. We are not here to ask for permission to exist. We are here to remind the world that we always have. Outside, the city moved beneath a sky more open than ever before. And somewhere, in countless offices, airports, and quiet rooms, new fires had already begun to glow. Autumn morning light spilled across the tarmac in Geneva, soft and unhurried. Celeste stepped into the private boarding tunnel, her steps echoing like a calm heartbeat against the metal walls. She wore a new ivory suit, its lines clean, every thread carrying the weight of 1,000 silent battles she had already won. A small black pin rested on her collar, shaped like a bird mid-flight. As she entered first class, she paused. A small plaque gleamed above Seat 1A reserved. Seat of change, we remember you. Celeste's eyes lingered on the words, not in pride, but in a quiet recognition that the world had finally learned to see what was always there. She placed her bag overhead, her movements fluid, unhurried. She lowered herself into the seat, feeling the leather curve around her like a long-awaited embrace. A young flight attendant approached, her hands steady, her voice soft but certain. "Welcome back, Ms. Morgan. We have your preferred meal ready." Celeste looked up, her gaze warm but unwavering. "Thank you." The attendant nodded, her eyes shining with something beyond duty, something like respect, something like understanding. As the other passengers settled in, Celeste glanced out the window. The runway shimmered under the soft glow of dawn, a quiet invitation to begin again. Her watch vibrated lightly. A final message from Aaliyah. Global Equity Advisory Board confirmed. First training program launches next month. Over 20,000 staff enrolled. Celeste exhaled, the air leaving her lungs like the last note of a symphony that had waited too long to be heard. She closed her eyes for a moment, the plane's engines rumbling to life beneath her. In her mind, she saw every woman who had once looked away, every silent nod shared in hallways and elevators, every small fire waiting to be lit. The plane began to move, a slow crawl turning into a graceful surge forward. Celeste opened her eyes just as the nose lifted off the ground. Beneath her, the earth fell away. Above her, the sky opened wide, endless and untouched. She felt the shift, not just of metal and air, but of a world that had finally learned what it meant to see someone fully. She pressed her fingers gently against the armrest, the smooth leather cool beneath her skin. As the clouds swallowed the horizon, a small smile flickered across her lips. Because sometimes, all it takes to change an entire system is one woman who refuses to be unseen.